Okay, now in this section we'll continue with some of the basic switching concepts. Now majorly we'll get into the command line. We'll try to understand the different types of switches we have and the Cisco hierarchy of switches, and then some of the basic configurations on the switches. So let us start with some discussing on different types of switches we have. Now in the switches we got two categories of switches. We have unmanageable switches and manageable switches. Now the major difference between these two is, in case of manageable switches, we can get into the command line. They do have the console port, just like we do on the routers, and we can verify some show commands, and also we can do some advanced switching concepts like VLANs, trunking, spanning tree. We can verify all these things, how they work, and also we can make some changes to the existing technologies. We can optimize them, we can make them to work much better. So the major difference is the command line. But when you talk about unmanageable switches, they are just plug and play. So plug and play means you just connect the power supply and then you can start using it. They do the job of a switching, like identifying the device based on the MAC address. It's the same thing what we discussed up to now, but you cannot do any changes. You cannot verify them. But whereas manageable switches also plug and play, you can still use them without doing any configurations, but we can do a lot of configurations in that, which are generally used in our advanced switching options. So that is something what we do, implement and test some of the advanced switching technologies on the manageable switches. Now some of the switches you find in the small size networks, we call them as unmanageable switches. The normal switches we can say, whereas manageable switches where we can manage. That's what command line access. Now the next thing we'll see here, the Cisco hierarchy. Now Cisco design all the switches in 3-level hierarchy. We have something called access level switches, similar to routers, which are low-end series routers. Generally we call them as layer 2 switches. Now these switches can connect to the computers and they can identify the device based on the MAC address, and they can forward the traffic based on the MAC address. Typically your 1900, 2900 series switches, which are more commonly used at the end locations. End location means connecting to some end devices, we can say. Now there are some other high-end switches. We call them as distribution and core level switches. So the distribution level switches are typically your next level switches, which are somewhat better speed processing switches, which supports more number of ports. 3550, 3560 and 3750 switches. We call them as L3 switches or layer 3 or multi-layer switches. Now the major advantage we get here is they do the job of a layer 2. That's what identifying the device based on the MAC address and then forward the traffic based on the MAC address. That is what we call as layer 2 job. Not only that, they can also be connected to a router and we can run some routing protocol. More like they can use this particular port as a layer 3 port, and we can do some routing kind of jobs here. So that's what we call as, that's the reason we call them as layer 3 switches or multi-layer switches. Now the same thing, core level switches also are capable of doing that. Now they can also do the layer 3 job, like 4500, 6500 series switches, we call them as core level switches. Okay, so the next thing we'll see some of the basic initial configurations on the switch. Now if you want to configure a switch, we just need to do the same thing like what we did on the routers. We need to connect our router to the console cable and then connecting back to the computer, connecting a 9-pin port on the computer side, RJ45 side, a console cable on the routers. It's the same thing, console connection, if you want to see the command line, just like we did on the routers. And the show commands are almost same. You can see the same modes you have some basic user mode and then privilege mode. All the show commands are same, so I'm not getting into that much more in detail here. And the show MAC address table, we have seen this command, if you remember, to see the MAC table entries, and the show interface status command, which will show you the interface status, like whether it is connected or not. It shows them different options like connected or not connected or a disabled state, something like that, which is in shutdown state. So this kind of information can be displayed by using show interface status commands. And if you want to make any changes, we go to the configuration mode. We can assign some VTY passwords, console passwords, auxiliary passwords, and also we can assign some enable and enable secret password or enable password more exactly same like routers. So, and the other thing, we can also assign an IP address to the switch, which is for management. Now, if you remember in the basic classes, what we did, we did not do anything on the switch. As I said, switch is a plug and play device. There's nothing to configure. But if you want, we can assign the IP address on the switch. But now the question is, why we need an IP address on the switch? Did we do that in our basic concepts or the basic classes? We didn't do that. Now, but in the production networks, generally every switch will also have an IP address from the same network what we are using. Now, the main reason for that is for telnet access, because in order to access the device remotely from the LAN, so I want to access the device by sitting here. I need to go to this PC, I need to assign the IP address, and I can access remotely from the LAN. In that case, there are 3 conditions we need to know, and those conditions are: there should be a connectivity between these 2 devices. So if you want to access the device from this computer to the switch, we already have some connectivity. And the second requirement, we need to have an IP address configured on that particular device. Right now there is no IP address, so that's the reason we are going to assign the IP address. And the third condition is there should be a VTY password configured. So there should be a password configured for VTY line for telnet access. Now right now there is one condition is already satisfying, that is we have a connectivity, there is no IP address, and we know how to assign the password also. So that's the reason we are going to assign the IP address, and to assign the IP address we need to go to the interface VLAN 1. VLAN is actually a virtual LAN interface. We'll be discussing more on this in our later on concepts. By default there is only one LAN, that is what we call as VLAN. It's a virtual interface. It's not a physical interface, it's a virtual interface. So we need to assign the IP address to the VLAN interface. Now we know how to assign the IP address. Give IP address, IP and subnet mask, and then no shutdown command. Why? Because this VLAN interface will be default, it will be in shutdown state. We need to give no shutdown to make the interface back to up. And then there's one more thing we can assign: IP gateway. This IP gateway command is more similar to, you need to tell who is your router. Who is my router? That is default gateway. So, and generally we give in this format. Now this IP default gateway is more equivalent to the command what we configure on the PCs. Now this is the command. Now this is equivalent, both are same. So the IP default gateway command, in case of PCs we configure in a separate tab or separate option here, but whereas in case of switches we are going to tell who is the gateway with this command. So let us configure these things on my switch. So my requirement here is, I want to access the switch by sitting in the command line here via telnet. That is my requirement here. So for that there are 3 conditions. As I said, there should be a connectivity. So already we have a connectivity here. So the second thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the IP address. So how to assign the IP address? Interface VLAN 1 and then IP address, and that IP address must be from the same network what we are using. So I'm going to use 1.50 or 150, whatever it is, 255.255.255.0, and then the subnet mask. Subnet mask is no shutdown, already given. And then we need to configure the VTY password for telnet access. Let's say the password is Cisco login. That's it. Now once we give this, now I'm going to the command line of the PC. Now on the command line, first I'll try to ping whether I have a connectivity to my switch or not. So the ping will ensure that we must have some connectivity between our switch here. Now I can see the reply is coming. It confirms that I'm able to ping, and then the next thing I'm going to assign the telnet command, and the password is Cisco. Now enable password is not set. I can configure that, that's not a problem. This is console screen, enable secret Cisco. There's no login here. And then if I just enable here, it will ask me the password. Now I can see I can access the switch as if I'm sitting on the switch. I'm doing some console, something like that. In the production networks, mostly in most of the networks, we every switch will have one dedicated IP, and that IP must be from the same network what we are using in the LAN. That's mandatory. Okay, and that should not be used anywhere. And if you need to tell who is a gateway, then we can use a command called IP default gateway, where I'm going to define the gateway address so that this switch can also be accessed remotely from the other side. Because if you want to access from here to any other device also, then you should go outside the network. In that case, the switch should know who is a gateway. So this is for accessing the device remotely as well. So these are some of the basic configurations we need to know. So we can see that all the configurations are exactly similar commands what we did in our basic routers. And the only thing is we need to assign the IP address on the switch for telnet access, but generally it is not required. But in terms of production networks, you will find all the switches assigned with some IP addresses so that we can access the device remotely via telnet.